Hi, we are the zookeepers, and we are going to be talking about if zoos should be banned or not. And I'm Kayla, and I'm going to be asking questions to our interviewers.
I'm Cameron Clark, and I will be answering the questions on why I'm against zoos.
I'm a Blake Bretschneider, and I am for keeping zoos.
I'm Austin Jurger, and I'll also be asking questions.
Okay, so for our first question, should we ban the keeping of animals in zoos, and if so, why?
I don't believe that we should ban keeping animals in zoos because they create pretty much essential bonds between humans and animals that may not otherwise be there. They're very influential in getting people to donate and getting people involved with wildlife and other ecosystems around the world. So if we didn't have zoos, people probably wouldn't pay a lot of attention to the actual wildlife out there, and zoos are very important in keeping the ecosystems the way they are now.
So for me, I think animal abuse occurs in zoos no matter if they're trying to intentionally do it or not. Zoos cannot provide the animals social equilibrium, which is why I think that they shouldn't be held captive in a zoo and why zoos should be banned.
All right, so next question. Do people learn from visiting zoos? So do they get any education out of the experience?
I do believe zoos do a pretty good job of educating people. This is because, easily as an example, you can probably remember grade school field trips where you went to the zoo and there were people teaching you about those animals. So just from that standpoint, I think there's a lot of good education already in zoos.
Yeah, I agree. Zoos can be used for educational purposes. They can also like strike interest in people visiting the zoos and also have educational facts. When you usually go to a zoo and see an animal, they usually have like a little thing that has facts about them. So I definitely agree that zoos can be educational.
Are zoos big enough for animals to be kept, or do you think they're too unnatural for animals?
I think for the most part, zoos work pretty hard to make animals comfortable. They make sure that their areas typically represent their specific habitats so that it's kind of like they're in the wild. Um, and if that weren't the case, I'm pretty sure it's more of an issue just like on a zoo to zoo basis. It's not just like all the zoos are terrible. I think the outliers are the ones that are pretty bad. So when you address bad conditions for the zoos, I don't think it's the norm. I think it's kind of like unusual.
Yeah, so I actually found an article that stated, I don't remember the exact numbers, but that animals have such a minimal amount of space compared to the wild, obviously. And as I mentioned before, this basically all goes back to taking away their social equilibrium. And this can cause like animal boredom, personality changes within the animals, and like zoos try to replicate the wild, but it's almost impossible to get it to be the way it would be in their natural habitat.
So do zoos actually prevent animals from going extinct?
Yeah, zoos actually play a big role in saving endangered species. This is because there are a lot of programs and nonprofits funded and ran by zoos to raise animals that are close to extinction and release them back into the wild. Uh, and this is pretty prevalent as there's already over 1,000 species that have been saved by zoos, and there's way more than that in the process. So, yeah.
I definitely think that zoos contribute to helping animals and like helping them not go extinct because they do take in animals and care for them. But there has been known for some zoos to breed the animals without just in an unethical way. So as long as they go the correct way about it, I think that they do contribute to helping animals not be extinct.
Do you think people go to zoos just for entertainment? And if so, do you think it's okay to do that?
I think big part of it actually may be people going in for entertainment, but at the same time, they also treat the animals like they're supposed to be treated. And at the end of the day, the zoos have to make money. So to some extent, the zoos are entertainment, but their goal is to provide those greater bonds that in the end help those animals and the ones in the wildlife as well.
So the way I kind of am going about it and think of things is, in the scheme of things, people are at the zoo to be entertained, and obviously a lot of people get a more personal kind of fulfillment from it, but in the end it's still entertainment. Whether or not like they're raising awareness, people are coming to this zoo to see the animals, and that's in my mind considered entertainment.
So some zoos say they will release animals back into the wild. Do you think this actually happens?
Yeah, I think that happens. I think it's kind of pretty undisputable. Uh, they have programs for it, and they do it all the time.
Yeah, I think this definitely happens. An example is like the zoo could find like an injured bird and heal it back to health, and they release it back in the wild. But I'm sure there's definitely zoos that take in animals and they never get the opportunity to go back in the wild. So
If they do release an animal, will it be able to survive after being kept in a zoo for so long?
Um, it depends on the case. I'm sure that an animal is born and raised in the zoo and never intended to be released probably wouldn't do too well in the actual wild. But animals that are a part of that rehabilitation program and a part of the endangered species programs that are designed to save animals probably survive just fine in the wild. I mean, just like every animal, it's kind of hard to gauge because in the wild, animals die all the time. So if you release one and it dies, you can't be for sure that it was because it wasn't used to and adapted to the wild.
yeah, so animals, if they're released in the wild, they might struggle right away getting used to their natural ways, but in the end it's the circle of life, and if an animal dies, it's tough to say, but it dies. Like, it's just how the wild is. I do think that there are also animals released into the wild that do perfectly fine and are capable of going back to their natural ways.
So do you think keeping an animal in a cage all day is cruel? If so,
Uh, yeah, actually, I do think that if you kept an animal in a small confined space, it wouldn't be very good for them. But I think for the most part, zoos do a pretty good job of creating a habitat that's similar to the one that they would see in the wild. And for the most part, they provide plenty of space. And again, outliers are probably the ones that have cages that aren't great for the animals and don't treat them as well.
So yeah, going off of that, I think it definitely is cruel in a way if this animal is perfectly capable of being in the wild and surviving on its own. I mean, it's obviously a different case if this animal is injured and needs to be treated and nourished back to health, but I think it's cruel if the animal can survive on its own in the wild and it's just in a cage to be in a cage.
What does the money that a zoo receive actually go toward?
Well, first, the money that zoos receive go to taking care of the facilities and animals. Also, you have to pay staff. And then on top of that, some of it, of course, goes to who, whoever the zoo is run for whatever things, but a lot of it actually goes to other nonprofits and programs within the zoos that help wildlife around the world. So.
Yeah, so like Blake said, basically the money goes to many different places. It's a long list of things such as like the workers, facility fees, organizations, food for the animals, and things like that.
so do you think zoos affect an animal's mentality?
Um, I think this question kind of depends. For the most part, if the animal has an adequate habitat and also is well taken care of, I don't think that zoos really would ruin an animal's mentality. I mean, obviously, if they were not well cared for and they did not have the necessities they needed to live, I do think that potentially some animals could experience depression or other mental issues. But as long as they're well cared for and well taken care of, I don't think it's an issue.
Yeah, so my point of view from it is I think that it does affect animals' mentality. Whether or not zoos do their best to try to care for the animal, it's obviously a tough situation to be in a cage, and a lot of the animals are actually in cages on their own, so it can cause animal boredom. And it just goes back to like taking them away from their social equilibrium and not being able to basically be how they would be in their own natural habitat.
What is the difference between zoos and sanctuaries?
The big difference between zoos and sanctuaries is mostly based off of their size and how are they run, and how they are run. For the most part, sanctuaries don't have a huge goal of making money, and a lot of their work actually comes on a volunteer basis, while zoos pay their staff. And their access to the public is usually more limited than zoos. Um, Most of the time, sanctuaries have more room and privacy for the animals. And unlike zoos, they typically only have one type of animal. And this leads to maybe better food and living conditions in sanctuaries versus zoos.
Yeah, so sanctuaries usually contain a specific animal or just a few different species rather than a zoo having a bunch of different animals. Obviously, like Blake said, they have a lot bigger facilities. Um, Something that I found is that there's still controversy on whether or not sanctuaries are just as bad as zoos. From this new Netflix documentary called The Tiger King, it's just kind of like a controversial thing between these two people. One owned a sanctuary and one owned a zoo, and whether or not they were kind of similar or different in that aspect. So
Approximately how many different species have zoos been credited with for saving from extinction?
Again, that number is well over 1,000, and I saw a couple articles citing that if it's kept going, it could save up to 1 million species.
yeah, so I'm unknown on this specific number, but I think zoos do help raise awareness for animals. Obviously, when people visit zoos, it spikes interest in a certain animal if they're able to see it. So I definitely think that zoos contribute to saving animals from extinction.
Are zoos better prepared to prevent other situations like the Harambe incident from happening in the future?
I think this is kind of a yes and no. I'm sure after the Harambe incident, many zoos actually upgraded the human side of their caging and stuff so that humans had less access, or it was less likely to have an accident in which a person would fall into the cage. But at the same time, I think that situation was a very unlikely accident. And so it was kind of like just a freak accident that probably it's 1 in a million. So yeah, they probably upgraded their caging and stuff like that. But again, that was just another outlier. And it's not every day where you have a kid fall into a gorilla cage and have the gorilla near the child.
Yeah, so when accidents happen like this, obviously it causes awareness, and zoos are going to upgrade their facilities or do something, change so like they can benefit from it. Um, these don't have, like Blake said, these don't happen every single day, but when they do happen, change always comes after it. So whether or not it's a good incident or a bad incident, change will probably be made after this happens.
Is the main purpose of zoos to provide entertainment for humans or provide a safe shelter for animals?
I think that's a pretty easy question to answer. I think they provide both. Obviously, they need to make money, so they need to provide entertainment for humans, but they also are a safe place for animals, and their goal is to treat animals well, while providing those connections for humans.
In my opinion, I think zoos' main purpose is for entertainment, but this doesn't always mean a bad thing. Like, their main purpose is for entertainment, but they're bringing awareness to these people that are coming to like visit the zoo. So it kind of corresponds with each other, that zoos are for entertainment, people are coming, but it's raising awareness in other people to help the animals.
What can be done to prevent the hiring of potentially abusive zookeepers?
I mean, first off, just to avoid that, the first place is you could always have pairs at the zoos, but For the most part, I don't think this is a huge issue because zookeepers often have to compete with many people just to get a job, and they get years of schooling and training. So I don't think it's a huge issue to begin with, but you could screen better. But again, I think it's already pretty rigorous and hard to get a zookeeper position. So I don't think this is a huge issue.
Yeah, I don't think this is a huge issue as well, but I think something to prevent the hiring of potentially abusive zookeepers is just a more intricate hiring process, as well as maybe like more hands-on training and simulation so they know what they're getting into. It can be a lot of work to handle large animals and not get out of control. So I think just like a better hiring process and more hands-on work while they're training.
Is it immoral to force zoo animals to perform tricks and do live shows?
For the most part, I don't think it's immoral to make animals perform tricks and do live shows, as well as as long as they are not treated poorly and actually maybe enjoy it. I mean, humans don't get upset when you make your dog sit for a dog treat. So I think if there's that same connection and it's not negatively affecting the animal, I think it's fine.
I mean, as a kid, obviously, I'd love going to the circus or going to the zoos, and I even went to Disneyland to see like whales and dolphins jump around. But I just like now that I've seen documentaries and learned more about this stuff, I definitely think it is kind of immortal to have these animals perform these main acts because, like said, making a dog sit, like you do that and you don't think that's wrong, but these are large animals not meant to be in captivity. Like a dog is domestic and these are wild animals. So I do think it's immortal.
Are there steps that zoos can take to more efficiently reintroduce the animals back into the wild?
Um, I don't think that it's a huge issue to get more effective at reintroducing animals back into the wild, as I think we've made pretty good progress and have a pretty good idea of what needs to be done. I think it's more of on an animal to animal basis, and not so much as just like an individual problem as a whole. More research could be done to help this, but again, it's animal by animal.
Yeah, I think there definitely is a process you just have to go through to release animals back in the wild. Obviously, you can't just drop them off in the middle of nowhere and just expect them to do their own thing. There's probably a efficient way to do it, so it's just a matter of finding that solution.
So is animal research a valid excuse to keep animals in zoos?
Yeah, I think it depends. Again, if you're helping save an animal and you want to research that, I think it's a good thing. But just like keeping a gorilla locked up in a cage, not in a good habitat, is not a good thing. But if it's done right, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I definitely think animal research is important, but obviously like this could bring up another controversy thing about animal testing and things like that. It's not very similar, but it can kind of correspond with each other. So as long as it's being done ethically, then I think it is okay.
Should zoos be allowed to participate in captive breeding programs?
I think as long as, again, they treat the animals right and they aren't like selling them all over the world and to wrong suited owners, I think it's fine.
Yeah, and it kind of like the previous question, I think if everything is done ethically and for the right reason and the correct purpose, I think it could be allowed.
So is there a certain requirement of training that zookeepers go through to be more knowledgeable of the animal's needs? If so, is that enough training currently?
Again, this is something I already brought up. Often you have to go through 4 years of school anyways, and then you have to do more training programs on top of that. And then once you get a job, they train you even more. Again, it's actually kind of hard to become a zookeeper, especially when you're working with certain types of animals. So I don't think this is a huge issue.
Yeah, so I think they obviously have to be required to go through a lot of training on being a zookeeper. another suggestion. They probably already do this, but it's just knowing the facts about animals, so if something does happen that they would know how to respond to it. So just knowing that knowledge on every animal that they're taking care of as well.
All right, that was our last question. So I think overall through our research, it shows that there is good, and we didn't really make a final decision on whether there should be or should not be, because I think there is both, it could go both ways. And thank you for watching our talk show.
Thank you.